What was the scariest moment of your life, that you only realized was scary after it happened? I was in my early 20s and worked in a residential program for young offenders. I took a New Year's Eve shift and finished work at 11 p.m. As I was walking home I ran into my friend Joe, who had also just gotten off of work. We decided we would see if we could find a place to get a New Year's drink, though we had no idea where because all of our usual haunts were hosting events and you needed a ticket to get in. We walked down one of the main drags of the city we lived in, but a quieter, more run-down block that mostly had pawn shops and money-lending spots, no bars or restaurants. We saw an open door which led up a flight of stairs where we could hear music coming from. The music was kind of old-timey, like 40s ballroom, big band. We couldn't hear any people noise either, so we figured the place wasn't packed. Joe and I had both lived in the general vicinity of this place for a few years and thought it odd we had never noticed it before and that there was no sign. We trundle up the stairs and walk into a big open room, which is decked out like a ballroom of sorts, kind of. There are a few huge chandeliers, a big long bar and a bunch of tables. There are about 30 people in the place, though you could have fit 100 no problem. It is all men and they are sitting around quietly playing cards. Joe and I look around. They all look up at us and then categorically ignore us and go right back to their cards. One older gentleman says something to the bartender in Russian. The bartender comes out from the bar and greets us. He looks like he is about 16, though maybe he was older. It is evident this young fellow doesn't speak a word of English. He sort of just looks at us quizzically and we mime that we would like a drink. He looks nervously at the older man, who gives his wave of assent. We head over to the bar and Joe and I each point to a beer in the refrigerator. The old guy puts up 2 fingers and says something else. The bartender waved for us to take a seat at a table off to the side of the main room. Joe and I sit down, confused and curious. The bartender comes over with 2 bottles of beer each and 2 shots of vodka and a small plate of meats and pickles. We thank him, he nods and leaves. Joe and I sip our beers, sip the vodka, which is clearly of a better quality than the cheap crap I was used to. Joe and I chat. We look around, trying to figure out where we are and what is going on. No one talks to us, or even looks at us. We finish up our drinks and the young bartender comes over and says nicely, "But directly you go now." We say okay and ask him what we owe him. He indicates the drinks are on the house, but it is time to leave. We try to give him a tip. He refuses. As we are leaving, the old fella stands up, wishes us a happy new year in a thick Russian accent and gives us a pontifical wave of sorts. Joe and I both thank him, sort of nod as a sign of respect, and make our way back down to the street. The bartender follows us and closes and locks the door behind us. I guess they didn't want any more drop-ins. Joe and I go back to my place and speculate as to what the deal was. We both decide it must be some Russian community club or center, which isn't odd. The city we lived in had a lot of immigrant communities from all over the world. It was weird though that there wasn't a woman in the entire joint and there was very clearly one guy in charge. This is where it gets interesting. A couple of weeks later I am in one of the seedier drinking holes in my neighborhood that often hosted a number of the local Hells Angels members, a few of which I was on speaking terms with. One of these fellas sidles up beside me at the bar to shoot the shit and I tell him about my New Year's Eve adventure. He asks which door specifically I went in. He asks me to describe the appearance of the old guy that was in charge. I do. He chuckles a bit and tells me Joe and I were treated to our drinks by the godfather of the Ontario Russian Mafia, who was in town for the week for some meetings. My acquaintance then strongly counsels me to never walk through that door again. Oh my God.